And despite all sorts of rumors and offers out there, Matt Campbell continues to be at Iowa State and do the job. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the Cyclones. We got Levi Stevenson on the line from SB Nation's platform for Iowa State. So check him out and the rest of the staff there at Wide Right Natty Light. Levi, how you doing today?
Pretty good. I'm just coasting into the holidays. I've got the next couple weeks off, so I'm enjoying the first day of my mini Christmas vacation.
So you're the guy that coasts into the holidays. The rest of it's just a hard crash into the holidays. Like, oh no, It hits us at some point that we're not ready.
Yeah, no, it's because I work. I'm a construction engineer. My company builds bridges, so we're starting. This is our slow season, so I can just kind of right into the holidays.
Absolutely, good stuff for you. The holidays a bit different for Iowa State football fans than they were just a few years ago, because the holidays were more about if you're really hardcore and didn't focus on the basketball team and stayed focused on football 365. Well, of course, it was going to be a long winter, spring, and summer to get to the next regular season start. But you play in these bowl games now. You've been introduced to bowl games and postseason play under Matt Campbell, and that was sporadic before that, of course.
Yeah.
Before we dive into the matchup with Notre Dame, I got to tell you, Levi, I had a conversation and what became a debate with one of your counterparts there at SB Nation concerning the work that Matt Campbell's doing versus the work that James Franklin's doing. And I had to try to outline all the advantages that James Franklin has in winning 10 games versus Matt Campbell winning 8, and what the heavy lift is in Iowa City or in Ames versus Happy Valley.
Right.
And it just, I'm not saying he's a better coach, but my goodness, we would have to scan the nation to find anybody doing a better job with less than what Matt Campbell has established at Iowa State. And not just winning 8 games, but even the losses are close against really good teams.
They're not getting blown out anymore.
No.
I mean, every single game they're in, they're in it till late into the fourth quarter. I mean, it's not the Iowa State of old where you go down to Waco and you get smoked 71-7 or anything like that. Even in, I think it's still this season they have not gotten beaten by more than 2 touchdowns yet. And there was, for 4 losses by a total of 7 points up until the Kansas State game, or up until the Oklahoma State game, or whatever it was. So everything's close. They're playing everybody close. So the wins are close. The losses are close. So Iowa State fans had plenty of gray hairs before. And now we've got a few extra. But the good part though is a lot of those gray hairs are coming out of wins instead of terrible losses now.
Absolutely. And since we're on the subject of Matt Campbell and what the job that he is doing, and of course, you've got to cringe and sit on the edge of your seat every time there's a big job opening because he's one of the first names that's mentioned now. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what is the secret sauce? What is he doing? What is the approach that makes it so effective?
So he always talks about building a culture and building a program of leaders and building player-driven leadership within the program. The way that kind of manifested itself is actually kind of a really interesting story. When the first recruiting class came in, because Matt Campbell was hired at the end, end of November, basically, right? 2 days after the last game of the season, or 3 days after the last game of the season. So he had a really, really short period of time to put together that first recruiting class. But that first recruiting class included Dave Montgomery, Deshaunte Jones, Jaquan Bailey, a bunch of other big time players that ended up or are still very, very good players for Iowa State. So you put together a really big time class of players to start off with. And then you had that first season that, went 3-9, but again, a lot of really good, a lot of close losses. And you could tell that the program had taken a step forward. It just wasn't quite showing up on the wins loss sheet just yet. And then as legend goes, in January, because they weren't playing a bowl game. So in January, there was, players would be in there working out, after class, whatever it is. And they went home, they would go, the coaching staff would be there, Friday night or something like that, getting ready to pack up. And who is out there working out, doing drills? Dave Montgomery. Yeah, he's out there, it's 11 o'clock midnight on a Friday night in January. Instead of going out with his friends or whatever, Dave Montgomery's out there running drills. He's lifting weights. He's watching film, whatever it is. And, that work ethic started to bleed out. And then it wasn't just him. It was him and a couple people. Then it was him and 10 people. Then it was the group. Then it was the whole team. Instead of going out, now they're, now they're all, even in the middle of January, they're all working out, they're lifting, so it's player driven leadership. And you've seen that continue now, where now it's not just building a culture, but now they've got a good culture established with lots of great leaders like Deshaunte Jones and Brock Purdy and Mike Rose. And you had Joel Lanning a couple years ago. Now you've got a lot, Greg Eisworth, you've got lots of great leaders in that room now. Now it's maintaining a culture. So you're talking about they've raised the floor, the expectation, if you want to call it that. And that was the first thing that needed to be raised at Iowa State. There's a lot of programs that in this situation, they would be shooting, we need to get, we're looking for 10 wins in a couple of years and stuff like that, just sky high expectations right away. Cause you have that first good season. Like Iowa State went 8-5 with a bowl win. And you say, okay, well, now we need to get to 9 or now get to 10 wins. And Iowa State fans understood where we were coming from, in that you had to raise the floor first. You had to raise the minimum expectation to, we're not, a bowl game isn't just, oh, great, we made a bowl game. That's a great season, there's kind of a famous quote from Matt Campbell. Actually, he said, apologies, I'm going to swear in your podcast, but he said, he's like, only bullshit teams care about 6-6.
Sure.
And that's a perfect quote. Because Iowa State fans are used to caring about 6-6. They want to go to whatever bowl game they can scrounge up, and that's it. And now he's raised that expectation, saying, okay, we're making a bowl game, period. Now we're shooting for more. Now we're shooting for a berth in the Big 12 title game, whatever it is. And part of raising that floor is getting that player-driven leadership to take you there. Now, how you get past that is recruiting and things like that, where you get the higher star recruits that then come in and raise the overall talent. There's 1,000 ways to get there, but raising the floor of the program, it takes the culture, the player-driven leadership, and the consistent attitude and effort that's required to get there. That wasn't always there at Iowa State.
Levi, you hit on 2 points right there that I really like, because I think they're undervalued, understated, not talked about a whole lot. Number one would be the basement or the floor of the program and the expectations. It's always, yes, it's okay, so-and-so took over this program and we were winning 3 and 4 games. Great. We got to 7 or 8 wins. We got to a bowl game. Oh, they need to get us to 9 and 10. They need to do this. And Matt Campbell hasn't necessarily yet done that, but we see that it's not going to sink a la Syracuse, 10-3, 4-8 again.
Yeah. This year, you actually said the stats actually flesh it out too, that Iowa State and Baylor were actually almost identical teams this year from a stats perspective. One team had a lot of luck and a lot of bounces go their way, and Iowa State was the other one that had basically zero luck. They had almost no bounces go their way. And you saw that, there were some games that they didn't play well and they still snuck it out. That's not something that Iowa State has ever done in the past, where you could play bad and still win. So the overall floor of the floor of the program is much higher, where we're not afraid of bottoming out at 4 wins or anything like that. I mean, you have a minimum talent level and you have a minimum, just an overall quality of the program now, where you have everybody's on the same page all the time, where you feel like, even if you're playing bad, you can, even if you have a bad season, bottoming out is still 6 wins, 7 wins or whatever. So that fleshed out this season too, where a lot of fans feel like 7-5 regular season was actually a bit of an underachievement. And maybe some bounces go their way, and they end up at 8 or 9 wins, or they play really well for the whole game against Baylor or Iowa, or they throw the touchdown, but they throw the correct pass to Charlie Kohler against Oklahoma, and now you're talking about a different season. Just the little things to do. Football is truly a game of inches. So they could, in theory, just kind of the way luck works out too, they could play exactly the same way next year and they could end up at 9-3 or 10-2. They got really close to that this year, actually. Just a few points and a few yards away. And now the details that are required to make up those couple points and those couple yards that's your next step as a program that obviously needs to be more consistent about doing. But they're on the right track.
So for those folks out there that fall in love with the advanced metrics and believe in them, keep track of your team, because partially what Levi is speaking to is turnover differential. Much of that is talent-based. Much of that is luck, bounce of the ball, and so forth and so
Literally,
on.
where does the ball bounce
differential
to your player
in baseball, it means something over 162 games. And therefore there's a difference between some of the coaches and programs that we see a quick blip to 7-5 or 8-4, but man, they beat everyone they were supposed to, and then they got chewed up by 40 points by the 3 losses, and so it really showed where their place is versus an Iowa State that continues to take the league banner Oklahoma down to a 2-point conversion at the end of the game. That was very impressive, down by as many as 3 scores, I believe, in that game. I watched the second half and took it right down to the.
And they showed too in that game that when they're locked in, there is basically, I mean, they can beat anybody. And that, that offense there, I think they finished 6th in yards per play on offense in the country. Obviously Oklahoma's number 1, but Iowa State also has the defense to back that up. It's not quite as good as last year, but still a very good defense in the relative, of college football. And they showed too that, they put up 21 unanswered points against Oklahoma in Norman in a second half comeback. And they showed, and when they showed that when they're engaged, they're a very dangerous team. They can put up a lot of points and they can shut you down. If they're engaged, they gotta be there. They gotta be all on the same page. They gotta be consistent. But when they are a very, very good team. And that's why if you look at like Sagarin and SPA Plus, even when they're at 7-5, 7-4, throughout the season when they were, quote unquote struggling, they still had them ranked as a top 25 team because the numbers all flesh out that they're actually a very, very good team. Just a couple bounces here, a couple plays here and there that it makes all the difference. And that's just kind of where Iowa State's season has been. That's why, even at 7-5, playing a 10-2 Notre Dame team in the Camping World Bowl is not, that's not your typical 7-5, 10-2 matchup. You're talking like an 8-9 or a 7-10 in the NCAA tournament type of thing. They're not very different teams.
Absolutely. Levi, I've needed you around every Sunday when I've released my top 25 that actually makes sense every Sunday, and have kept Iowa State despite what has appeared a marginal record in the back end of my top 25 week after week after week after week, because again, the performance on the field. Talking Cyclones, we got to Levi Stevenson on the line. Notre Dame is the next opponent, of course, in the Camping World Bowl. You can catch Levi and the rest of the staff there at Wide Right Natty Light SB Nation. So you mentioned David Montgomery. Of course, he's now productive in the NFL. For a while, in addition to having the hotshot new coach who lifted you from 3 or 4 wins to 8, you were also known for having a linebacker playing quarterback. That's no longer the case. Of course, Brock Purdy is very established. Let's start on an offensive review here. If you could take us through the offense, you're known for not having a whole lot of big playmakers on the outside. Maybe that's the crux of the situation, not having those kind of dynamic guys that the elite teams have. But from Brock Purdy on down, take us through the offense.
Yeah, so Brock Purdy is probably, he's right now, he's pretty much a consensus top 10 quarterback in the country. There's a lot of argument and a lot of people that believe he's a top 5. And next year, after this year, when Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts and a few of these other Intua and those guys graduate, you're talking about a top 5 quarterback in the country. He's one of the best leaders that I've personally ever seen on a football team. Don't want to use hyperbole too much, but he is very Tim Tebow-esque in his leadership, where everybody rallies around him. From day one, last year when he started as a true freshman, everybody rallied around him from day one, from play number 1. And he has the trust of his guys. Charlie Kohler, who is in my mind the best tight end in the country, and we'll get to him in a second. He's been quoted a couple different times saying he'd go into battle with Brock Purdy any day of the week. Everybody on that offense has tremendous respect for Brock. He's an accurate quarterback. He's got a good arm. He's a gamer. He's a good improviser. He can do a lot of damage on the ground when he's allowed to. But he's an excellent leader. At the running back position, you've got Breece Hall, who is probably he's the best. He's made a bunch of freshman All-American teams at running back. Probably he's one of the best young running backs in the country, the best young one in the Big 12. He's averaging, his first start ever in college football, he had about 160, 170 yards against West Virginia. He's a very, very talented runner. There's a lot of people within the Iowa State sphere that get to watch him and that saw David, that believe that he can or will be better than David Montgomery by the time his career is over. He's faster. He's just as physical. He's a little bit, he's just as versatile, but he's got the top end speed that David didn't have. So, you really like where he takes you. And there's a few running backs behind him, Johnny Lang, Jarrell Brock, Kanene Nwangu, that are all dangerous playmakers as well. But without a doubt, Breece Hall is the bell cow that you can pretty much chalk him up for 25 carries most games. Offensive line is mostly you're going to be losing 3 of them next year. Julian Good-Jones, Josh Knipfel, and Bryce Meeker. But this is one of those things because of how long it takes offensive line to develop. A lot of these guys are 5th-year seniors. A lot of these guys were actually Paul Rhodes recruits. But Bryce Meeker and Julian Good-Jones are actually both Paul Rhodes guys. So they're not even, Matt Cramel didn't even recruit those guys. But you're replacing, essentially what you're doing here is you're replacing experience with talent. The guys that are coming in, the young guys coming in, are more talented. They have a better base to work off of. It'll just, it'll take them a little bit to get going. They'll have to get up to speed. Obviously, offensive line takes a little while. It takes a really special player to be able to be like a really standout freshman at offensive line. But again, you're replacing talent with experience. So that is a burgeoning group that should be very good next year, especially after 3 or 4 games when they've had a chance to gel up a little bit. Then moving out, I guess the tight ends is kind of the tight ends are a really interesting position because was it 2015? 2015, they didn't have a single touchdown catch. 2016, they didn't have any either. They didn't have a touchdown catch for like 4 years, the tight ends. And all of a sudden now they're reeling in like 100 they're reeling in like 100 receptions as a group. And Charlie Kohler's I think he's got like 6 touchdowns maybe. They are 3 deep now for the bowl game. Dylan Sainer is out for the bowl game, so now they're 2 deep for the bowl game. But you've got Charlie Kohler, who should have been a Mackey Award finalist. It was a disgrace that he wasn't. He's the best tight end in the Big 12, the best pass catching tight end in the Big 12, and he's one of the best in the country. And he it's a huge majority of his catches. I want to say it's something in the 70% range of his catches end up as first downs or touchdowns. That dude is a playmaker. He gets Iowa State the yards they need to do what they need to do. Chase Allen is he's a great dual guy. He's a great pass catcher, great run blocker. Dylan Sainer, like I said, he's not playing, but he'll all 3 of these will be back next year. Dylan Sainer is a mountain of a man. He's 6'7", 280. He's kind of their tank run blocker, but he's got a touchdown catch. He catches passes too. So all 3 of them are good run blockers. All 3 of them will be used in the passing game, and sometimes they put all 3 of them on the field at the same time. And now when even next game where they won't have all 3, they'll still have 2. But Iowa State puts two tight ends on the field, especially in the Big 12, when they generally don't have the size in the middle of the defense to deal with those. Having multiple tight ends that can block and pass catch effectively is a huge mismatch. And going into Notre Dame too, they're better receiving tight ends than maybe they're used to seeing, and they've got more speed than those linebackers can cover effectively for long stretches. So that'll be a point to watch for that bowl game too. But then moving to the outside, you've got a very deep group of receivers: Deshaunte Jones, Tariq Milton, Michael Petway, Sean Shaw, Landon Akers. You've got there's been a handful of games this season where I think Brock Purdy has hit 10 different receivers during the game. I mean, he spreads the ball all over the place. Now, Deshaunte Jones, Tariq Milton, those are kind of your typical slot guys. Michael Petway picks up the big third downs and touchdowns. He's become a playmaker throughout the season and a dependable target. He's a grad transfer from Arkansas. Then you've got Sean Shaw, he's the next really tall Iowa State receiver. He's about 6'6.5". He's a big dude. He's a little bit more of a fluid runner than Hakeem Butler and Alan Lazard were. So he'll be a name to watch for 2020, especially. Then Joe Skates is behind him. He was a 4-star receiver coming out of high school that had offers from Alabama and Ohio State and all these. He had some academic issues, which scared them off a little bit, but Iowa State has gotten that figured out. So now they ended up with a guy that Alabama and Ohio State offered for, didn't really have to compete with them. So plus for us for sure. But that wide receiver group is deep, lots of really talented pass catchers, and Brock Purdy will hit any of them on any play. He doesn't really have a guy that you don't have that guy that's going to average 10 receptions a game or anything like that. I mean, he has his guy, Charlie Kohler, he likes to look for in third down. Michael Petway is another one. But he'll spread the ball around quite a bit. And that's part of what makes this receiver group so dangerous compared to last year when you have Hakeem Butler, who's one of the more dominant receivers in the country, basically impossible to guard one-on-one, is that a lot of targets went his way. And it was really easy for the defense to focus on him. And you had to rely on all the other guys to make their yardage. Because, coming out of last year, the big questions on offense, besides the offensive line, which is always a question for Iowa State, is you lose Dave Montgomery and you lose Hakeem Butler. Probably the best running, probably the second or third best at their position in school history, both of them. And how are you going to replace that? Well, it turns out that if you spread the ball around a little bit more, it's a little bit easier to move the ball. So you went from an offense that was like 40th in the country in yards per play to 6th, but you lose 2 all-time playmakers, and that's because you can spread the ball around more. And you can divvy that up, and it's the offense. Like I said, when you saw it against Oklahoma, you saw it against a few other teams that when the play calling's in a good spot and they're throwing the ball around and they're hitting lots of different receivers, Iowa State's offense is really hard to stop. Really hard to stop.
Kohler with 48 catches, 14 yards per catch, an excellent rate for a tight end, 7 receptions in the end zone, and Purdy 27 touchdowns, 9 picks at 66%. And as you mentioned, the yards per play stat at 6th in the nation. That's a stat that people need to lock in on.
That's a new one too that people aren't used to paying attention to, but that especially going forward, pay attention to yards per play, because that's
absolutely
one of the best indicators on how good an offense actually is at moving the football. That's why Oklahoma's always number one. I think last year they set the record at like 9-something yards a play. It was something silly like that. Oklahoma's always way up there, and then there's a couple teams that are in there. Like I think Clemson's probably up there, and there's a few other teams. But then you got Iowa State that's 6th, which is interesting. Because you lose Dave Montgomery and Hakeem Butler, and all of a sudden they're 6th in the country at yards per play.
That says a lot. Again, it takes out tempo, time of possession, and basically how dominant is the offense.
Right.
And Vegas uses that stat to determine, obviously, defensively as well. And that's what established this program under Matt Campbell was suddenly, okay, they don't turn it over on offense. They're stopping people in an offensive league that throws it all over the place. I think that's very overstated at this point.
Yeah.
3 or 4 years ago, because if you look at the scores in the Big 12, they're the same scores as we see across the nation. But 3 or 4 years ago, 48-45 was the rule in the Big 12, and Iowa State and maybe a little Texas and TCU made their statement on defense. So as you well know, Levi, people are going to be watching Iowa State football against Notre Dame that have not seen you the entire season. So highlight those guys that we need to lock in on defense.
On defense, for sure. So Greg Eisworth is he might be the best overall player on the defense. He's a safety. He kind of plays what they call it a star role. It's sort of like a nickelback hybrid safety linebacker. That dude's a playmaker. You'll see him pretty much every tackle that's made here. He's either making the tackle or he's about 2 foot away. He's a playmaker in the back end of the defense. He's a very good coverage. He's good at run stopping situations as well. So you'll hear Greg Eisworth, number 12. You'll hear his name called quite a bit. On the end, you've got another one that you're going to want to watch. He's not a starter, but he has come on in the last few weeks, and I think they're planning on using him quite a bit as a chaos creator, which is Will McDonald at the defensive end. He's a little bit smaller than you're used to. Maybe he's like 6'4", 225, 230. So he's not like a big brute at the defensive end like you're maybe used to seeing, but that dude is fast. And you saw, if you watch the second half in the Texas game, and even against Kansas State too, but especially in the second half against Texas, there was he got a couple sacks, and if you look, we kind of counted about 8 or 9 times he got held, just straight up held, like should have been a flag, just wasn't. He is athletic enough that most tackles will not be fast enough to contain him on the edge. So in obvious passing situations, 3rd and long, 4th and long, stuff like that, keep an eye. They'll probably put Will McDonald on the field. Keep an eye, because they'll let him pin his ears back and go. And if he has a chance to get around that tackle, he can create a lot of chaos in that backfield. And he's got a couple strip sacks in his very young career as well. So that'll be definitely one to keep an eye on. You've got a few young corners that are pretty good. Tavon Kyle, you'll probably hear. Anthony Johnson as well. Another one you want to keep your remember anyways. Mike Rose, he's an outside linebacker. He's a tackle machine. He makes a lot of tackles on the edge when they try to bounce runs outside. Very, very, very good linebacker. Orion Vance is in the middle of that defense as well. You'll probably hear the announcers talk a little bit about the defensive tackles and the nose tackle. Ray Lima and Jamal Johnson. They're one of the best tandems at the defensive spot in the Big 12 for sure, and up there in college football. Anyways, they're very talented, and they make that 3 down front work for Iowa State on defense.
Levi, to your point, McDonald, with only 14 tackles on the season, having played most of his snaps late, but 6 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. So man, he makes those plays.
He makes it happen when he gets a chance to pin his ears back. That kid's dangerous, and you'll probably see a more expanded role for him next year too. But I think they're going to try to unleash him against Notre Dame. I think they think that he can use his athleticism as an edge rusher to get around those tackles and force Ian Book. To put some pressure on him and make him a little bit nervous.
And of course, Mike Rose, a guy that has been at the core of leading this program and its resurgence under Matt Campbell. Levi Stevenson on the line from SB Nation's Wide Right and Natty Light. Iowa State football, Cyclones taking on Notre Dame should be a fun matchup. Forget the records. Remember last year, what was it, 28-26? It was a great game against Washington State in the National Bowl right down to the wire. And I remember a call or two that were a bit, if I remember that right, and I think I did. I loved watching that game. It was a great game.
It was a phenomenal game.
That there was a Iowa State could have won that game very, very, very.
Probably should have, but that's another one. Should have won it, but Mike Leach he's a good coach. Maybe he's always got his guys ready to go. So it's just one of those things. It's one of the stepping stones for Iowa State is how do you make the little plays that you need to win those close games against a 10-2 Washington State team or a 10-2 Notre Dame. You got to make those close games. I think it's going to be a really close game this weekend. So they got to make the plays.
So Levi, whether it be a Notre Dame playing throughout the year and you not knowing that you were going to play them at the time and just catching them in the big games, or doing some of your prep work for the bowl game, your thoughts about the Irish?
The defense is obviously kind of the highlight of that team. It's a very good defense. One of the things that's interesting about them is they have their passing aggregates are pretty good as far as the total yards per game and things like that they give up. Part of that, and their pass defense gets a little bit skewed because they play teams like Navy that threw I think they threw 4 passes in that game. So the passing statistics get a little bit skewed. They're much more vulnerable in the run game. I think they're right about middle of the pack, 60, 70th roughly in yards per play on rushing attempts. So they're a very good pass defense and a pretty good rush defense, but not world stopping or anything like that. Offensively, if you can force Ian Book to throw from the pocket, he's kind of like a poor man Jalen Hurts actually, where he definitely will do damage on the ground, but if you force him to sit in the pocket, you can have some success against him. Now he's not quite as much of a, I don't know if you want to call it as a gamer as Jalen Hurts is maybe, or not as much of a gunslinger, I guess. Jalen Hurts will take some risks with some throws and he can be a little bit more turnover prone than Ian Book is. But they're very, very similar type of players. And Iowa State contained Jalen Hurts fairly well. And I think they'll probably use a very similar scheme against Ian Book as well. If you can slow down him and the receiver, I can't remember his name on the outside. Two very, very good players. If you can slow those two down, you have a very good chance of having of beating Notre Dame. Because I feel very good about Iowa State's offense. It's one of the best in the country. It's one of the 10 best offenses in the country. And Notre Dame's defense is very good, but I would argue they probably really haven't played an offense that has the same kind of firepower that Iowa State does, which is kind of a weird sentence to say. I'm not used to saying something like that. But even like the teams that they played, Michigan, Georgia, even the really good teams they played, not necessarily known for having really high powered offense. We saw last week that Georgia's offense is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. And Michigan's is not going to put up, they're not going to put up a ton of points usually. USC's is fine, but Iowa State can move the ball a lot more efficiently than all of those teams can. So they're Notre Dame's probably facing the best offense they've faced this year. So far, they're playing against a unique defensive front. You don't see very many of the 3-down fronts in the Big Ten or the ACC, or really anywhere on their schedule. You don't see the 3-3-5 stack very often at all. So it's an unusual thing to prepare for. They fired their offensive coordinator, which could go one of two ways. They could have some new stuff that Iowa State's not ready for, or if John Haycock's one of the better defensive coordinators in the country, and if you're going up against 27-year-old Tommy Rees, I like my odds I'll take John Haycock against Tommy Rees in a chess match. So I actually kind of like the matchup. Honestly, it's not a bad match. Notre Dame's a good team, no doubt, very good team. They've at minimum earned their place here, maybe even in the group, maybe in the New Year's Six. But I think Iowa State actually matches up fairly well with them. And a couple key stats to keep your eye on is one, Iowa State is 13th in the country in penalties committed. They don't hurt themselves on penalties very often. Now, if they do, it's usually at horrible times. But as a total number, it's usually a good number. Obviously, doesn't hurt itself. Notre Dame's 70-something, 75th-ish. So they're okay on penalties, but they can be mistake prone. And 2 is actually on red zone defense. Iowa State is very good, and on offense, Iowa State is very, very good at moving the ball between the 30s, especially. They can get to the red zone fairly frequently. They've sometimes had a difficulty finishing drives off. But Notre Dame is actually the second worst red zone defense in the country in terms of scoring. They give up points on 97% of defensive possessions in the red zone, and they've given up 100% over at least the last few games, if not back to the middle of the season. So if Iowa State can get to the red zone, the scoring opportunities will be there, especially in a close game. a field goal isn't necessarily a loss. I think you can, the more trips you can get there, you'll have touchdowns. I mean, they've got plenty of threats. Charlie Kohler, Chase Allen, LaMichael Poway, all the guys we just talked about, that they can get the ball into the end zone. But if you're putting up points every single possession, even if it's a field goal, if you get a couple touchdowns and a few field goals, you're up in the mid 20s. And if for Iowa State, generally speaking, if you can hold a team to the low to the mid 20s, your win rate's pretty high. So I see this as a game, low 30s to mid 20s type of game. And if Iowa State's having success in the red zone at the same rate that everybody else has been having success in the red zone against Notre Dame, I like that matchup. Actually, I like that statistical matchup.